Subscribe for more amazing stories. The rain had been falling all day in the city, drumming a steady rhythm against the cracked windows of the small orphanage where Lily lived. She sat by the window, her wheelchair parked close, staring at the wet streets below. People passed by without a glance, their umbrellas shielding them from the storm as they hurried away. She had long grown used to the world's indifference, the whispers behind her back, and the pitying looks from strangers. Her legs hadn't worked since the accident 5 years ago, and in that time, she had learned that society had no place for someone like her, someone fragile, vulnerable, someone who relied on others to get through the simplest of tasks. Her caretaker, Mrs. Wilkins, bustled around the room, tidying the few belongings Lily had. She was kind in her own way, but there was only so much she could do. The orphanage had limited funds, and most days, Lily felt like a ghost in her own life. She didn't complain anymore. Complaining didn't change anything. She had learned to stay silent, to curl up in her thoughts, and to watch life happen to everyone else while she remained stuck in one place. The bell above the door jingled, and a gust of cold wind swept in, carrying the faint smell of leather and expensive cologne. Lily's head lifted instinctively. Visitors were rare, and when they did come, it was usually to donate a few dollars or leave a bag of clothes. But this was different. The figure that stepped inside had an air of authority, the kind that made everyone in the room sit straighter, hearts thumping in silent awe. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit, his dark hair slicked back perfectly. But it was his eyes that caught Lily off guard, sharp, commanding, yet somehow soft when they met hers. The room seemed to shrink around him, and even the chatter of the other children and the caretakers faded into a background hum. "I'm looking for her," he said, his voice low and certain, like a storm ready to break. There was no introduction, no hesitation. The words carried weight, as if the universe itself had paused to listen. "Her, Mrs. Wilkins asked nervously, adjusting her glasses. Who are you?" "I'm someone who doesn't take no for an answer," he replied, scanning the room until his gaze settled on Lily. Time seemed to slow. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with an unfamiliar flutter of curiosity and confusion. Everyone had turned away from her, avoided her, treated her like she was fragile porcelain ready to shatter. But he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Before anyone could react, he approached, his steps measured and deliberate. "Come with me," he said, and there was an unmistakable command in his tone. I can't," Lily whispered, panic rising in her chest. She had been told all her life that she was a burden, that the world would never understand her. And yet, something in his presence made her want to trust him, even as fear coiled in her stomach. He crouched slightly to meet her at eye level, his eyes softening. "You don't have to speak. Just trust me." Something inside her, something that had been dormant for years, stirred. She hesitated for only a moment before letting him gently lift her from the wheelchair. The warmth of his hands around her made her feel safe. Not weak, not broken, safe. And for the first time in a long time, Lily allowed herself to hope. The other children whispered among themselves, some of them staring in awe, others in envy. They had all seen him in the city, heard the rumors of his power, of his ruthless reputation. He was a Mafia boss, feared and respected by many, yet here he was, cradling a girl everyone else had abandoned. "She's mine," he said firmly, his gaze meeting Lily's once more. There was no hesitation, no doubt. The words were heavy, absolute, and impossible to ignore. Lily's breath caught in her throat. Everyone had abandoned her, avoided her, told her she was unworthy, but he claimed her like she was the most valuable treasure in the world. The ride to his penthouse was surreal. Lily had never been in a car like this, the interior leather warm and soft, the city lights reflecting off the windows like scattered stars. She tried to speak, to ask questions, but words failed her. He simply held her gently, murmuring soft reassurances whenever she flinched. When they arrived, the grandeur of his apartment left her speechless. Floor-to-ceiling windows, sleek furniture, and the faint scent of expensive perfume filled the air. But Lily's attention was solely on him. For someone who ruled a kingdom of shadows and secrets, he seemed different here. Human, even kind. He set her down in a plush chair near the window, keeping one hand lightly on her arm. "You're safe here," he said. "No one will hurt you. No one will look down on you again." For the first time in years, Lily felt the tight grip of fear loosen, replaced by something fragile and new: trust. She had no idea what this man wanted from her, or why he had chosen her, but in that moment, she didn't care. For once, someone believed in her, not despite her disability, but perhaps because of it. Outside, the city hummed, indifferent as always. But inside that penthouse, in the warmth of his gaze and the strength of his presence, Lily realized something she hadn't dared to imagine in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, she belonged somewhere after all. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, Lily woke to the soft hum of the city below and the unfamiliar feeling of being cared for in a way she had never known before. She was still in the penthouse, wrapped in a warm blanket, the sunlight filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows and painting golden streaks across the room. The events of the previous night played over and over in her mind: the storm, the orphanage, and the way the Mafia boss had lifted her as though she weighed nothing at all. She had spent years being ignored, treated as fragile and unworthy, but now, even the thought of him brought a strange warmth that she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He entered the room without knocking, as if it were expected that she would know he belonged here, just as much as the space did. "Good morning," he said simply, his deep voice resonating with authority, but softened by an unspoken tenderness. Lily's heart thumped unexpectedly fast. She wasn't used to someone speaking to her without pity or fear. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his eyes scanning her carefully for any sign of discomfort. She wanted to answer, to ask a million questions, but all she could manage was a small nod. That nod, however, seemed to satisfy him. "I have arranged for you to have everything you need," he said, moving to the minibar and preparing her a glass of water. "Meals, medicine, anything you require. You won't go without anything here." Lily had never experienced such attention, and part of her felt guilty accepting it. She was used to taking whatever scraps life left for her, quietly, without expectation. Yet the way he looked at her, steady, unwavering, as if she were the most important thing in the world, made it impossible to resist. The day passed slowly, filled with small moments that left a lasting impression. He taught her how to navigate the penthouse in her wheelchair, moving with a patience that made her feel seen rather than helpless. When she stumbled over a rug or struggled to reach for something, he didn't scold or sigh, he simply adjusted his grip, guided her gently, and smiled with encouragement. Every gesture was meticulous, deliberate, and somehow wrapped in an inexplicable intimacy that made Lily's chest tighten. She had never been treated this way before. The world had been harsh, judgmental, and cruel, yet here, in this high-rise sanctuary, she felt a sense of security she hadn't known existed. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow across the room, he brought up matters that Lily hadn't anticipated. "People talk about me," he began, his tone neutral but carrying a weight she couldn't ignore. "About who I am and what I do. But that won't matter here. None of it will affect you. You are safe with me." The words were simple, yet they held an implicit promise. Lily understood that danger followed him wherever he went, that his world was not one of ordinary safety. But somehow, she didn't feel fear, she felt trust, a fragile trust that she wasn't sure she fully deserved. Dinner was delivered in a quiet, intimate setting. He insisted on sitting across from her, not beside her, though his presence filled the room completely. They didn't speak much, and yet every glance, every subtle movement conveyed unspoken understanding. Lily watched him as he ate, noting the meticulous way he handled every item on the table, the slight crease of concentration on his brow, the rare softness in his eyes whenever he glanced at her. It was in these small details that she began to understand him, not the rumors, not the public persona of the feared Mafia boss, but the man who cradled her gently and declared her his. After dinner, he suggested they take a walk on the private terrace. It was early evening, the city lights flickering like stars against the darkening sky. Lily's wheelchair rolled smoothly over the polished floor, his hand never leaving hers to steady her. "The world outside may seem unforgiving," he said, his voice low and introspective, "but it doesn't have to touch you. Not if you don't let it." She wanted to ask him why he chose her, why someone like him, a man with power, wealth, and influence, would claim a girl everyone else rejected. But the words stuck in her throat, replaced by a feeling she couldn't name, a mix of fear, awe, and the faintest hint of something that felt suspiciously like longing. Night came, and with it, a quietness that settled over the penthouse like a protective blanket. Lily sat by the window, watching the city that had once ignored her glow beneath the stars. He stood nearby, silent, allowing her the space to breathe, yet his presence was constant, grounding. "You'll learn," he said softly, almost to himself, "that strength doesn't always come from walking. Sometimes, it comes from being brave enough to let someone in." Lily's heart thudded. Brave enough to let someone in. She had spent years shutting the world out, building walls higher than she realized. And yet, for the first time, she felt an urge to lower them, if only slightly, just enough to see what it might be like to be cared for without conditions. Over the next few days, their routine became a strange, comforting rhythm. He never asked her to do more than she could manage, but he always challenged her gently, pushing her boundaries in ways that made her feel alive. They spent hours talking about everything and nothing: books, music, the world outside, and fragments of their pasts. She learned that he had a reputation that terrified many, but behind the fearsome image was a man with his own scars, his own losses, and a capacity for tenderness that was rare in his world. In return, he learned that Lily had endured a lifetime of neglect and cruelty, yet she carried herself with a quiet dignity that even he could not ignore. One evening, a faint knock at the door reminded them that the world outside the penthouse still existed. It was a subtle intrusion, a reminder that danger and scrutiny followed him everywhere. But he handled it calmly, efficiently, and with a protective instinct that left Lily feeling safer than she ever had in her life. For the first time, she understood that his declaration of, "She's mine," was not just possessiveness, it was a promise to shield her, to protect her from the harshness of a world that had never cared. As she settled into bed that night, exhaustion washing over her, Lily realized she had spent the last few days feeling emotions she had long thought impossible: hope, trust, and the faint, exhilarating spark of excitement at the thought of what life might hold if she allowed herself to believe in him. And as sleep claimed her, she couldn't help but wonder, for someone so feared, so powerful, how could a man like him choose to care so deeply for a girl like her? The answer, she suspected, was only the beginning of a story far larger than either of them could imagine. The days in the penthouse had grown into a strange, comforting rhythm, but Lily couldn't shake the feeling that the world outside was never far away. The city that had once ignored her was now a distant echo, yet whispers of danger seemed to follow him everywhere. She had begun to understand that the man who had cradled her so gently and declared, "She's mine," was not just powerful, he was constantly hunted, feared, and respected in equal measure. But in the safety of his penthouse, she allowed herself to imagine a life untouched by fear, even if only for a few hours at a time. It started subtly, with small reminders that their sanctuary wasn't completely invulnerable. A low-ranking messenger appeared in the lobby one afternoon, insisting on speaking with him. Lily had been sitting near the window, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face, when she noticed the tension in his shoulders. He didn't seem angry, but there was a hardness in his eyes, a silent warning that this visitor carried weight. She watched him handle the interaction with practiced control: firm words, subtle threats, and then dismissal. Yet even as he returned to her side, the careful calm he displayed didn't erase the undercurrent of danger that seemed to follow him like a shadow. "You don't have to worry about them," he said quietly, his hand brushing against hers in a gesture meant to reassure. "I've dealt with worse. And I won't let anything happen to you." His words, while comforting, also carried an undeniable gravity. Lily could see the tension linger in his posture, in the sharp lines of his jaw, and she realized that his world was one of constant vigilance. Yet despite the danger, he had chosen her, not as a pawn, not as a prize, but as someone to protect, to care for. Their conversations began to grow longer, more intimate. Lily learned things about him that the world outside would never guess: the rare moments when he laughed, the memories he kept hidden, the reasons why he guarded his heart so fiercely. And in return, he learned about her past, the years of neglect, the whispers of pity, the loneliness that had shaped her. She spoke cautiously, testing the waters of his trust, while he listened without judgment, offering insights and gentle encouragement that made her feel seen in ways she had never experienced. It wasn't just the words that drew them closer, it was the silences, the shared glances, the subtle touches that lingered a heartbeat too long. One evening, as they watched the city lights flicker from the terrace, he leaned slightly closer. "You have a strength that most people will never understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily's heart pounded, a mix of fear and exhilaration. She had always considered herself weak, confined by her body, overlooked by society. But in his presence, she began to feel powerful in ways that transcended physical limitations. Yet, even as their bond deepened, the reality of his world crept in. One night, a sharp knock on the penthouse door jolted them from their quiet evening. He moved with a speed and precision that made her gasp, disappearing from view to confront the unexpected visitor. From where she sat, she could hear fragments of conversation, low voices, harsh words, a subtle threat, but his calm authority carried through. When he returned, there was a tension in his eyes that he tried to mask, but Lily noticed. "Nothing to worry about," he said, though the faint crease on his forehead betrayed the lie. Danger was never far, and yet, for the first time, she felt that she had someone who would fight fiercely to keep her safe. In the days that followed, he took extra precautions, ensuring that her movements were safe and that the penthouse remained secure. He introduced her to a small circle of trusted allies, people who would act as guardians if necessary, yet Lily couldn't ignore the way he watched her, a subtle protectiveness in every gesture. It made her feel cherished, but also aware of the constant threat that lingered beyond these walls. She had always been invisible to the world, but now, with him, she felt like a target in the best and worst possible ways, valuable, protected, but always watched. Despite the danger, or perhaps because of it, their connection grew stronger. He began to teach her small things, how to navigate situations with confidence, how to assert herself without fear, and how to trust her instincts. She had always relied on others for mobility and care, but he encouraged her to make choices, to speak her mind, and to demand respect. It was a strange, exhilarating experience. For years, she had been a ghost in her own life. Now, under his guidance and protection, she was becoming a force of her own. One evening, as the sun set and bathed the city in hues of gold and crimson, they sat together on the terrace, the wind tugging lightly at her hair. He reached out, brushing a strand from her face, his fingers lingering longer than necessary. "You're not just surviving, Lily," he said softly. "You're living. And that makes you dangerous in the best way possible." She felt her cheeks heat up, a mix of embarrassment and something deeper she didn't want to name. It was the first time she realized that the feelings stirring in her heart were more than gratitude, they were something she had never dared to experience before. Their nights became a time of quiet closeness. He would read to her from books he thought she might like, tell stories from his past, or simply sit with her in silence. She began to understand the nuances of his world, the alliances, the threats, the calculated risks, and yet, she never felt like a burden. He included her, valued her opinion, and treated her as someone capable of understanding a complex world she had only glimpsed from the sidelines. But just as Lily began to feel a fragile sense of stability, a new threat emerged, a whisper from his past that reached him in the dead of night. A rival, someone who sought to exploit his affection for her, had started asking questions, testing boundaries, and probing for weaknesses. He didn't tell her immediately, choosing instead to shield her until the threat became unavoidable. Yet she sensed the tension, the small changes in his demeanor, the way his jaw tightened, the way he scanned the perimeter more frequently, the rare moments when his eyes flickered with worry even as he smiled reassuringly at her. It was in these moments, seeing him unguarded even briefly, that Lily realized the depth of his devotion. He wasn't just claiming her as a possession, he was risking everything to keep her safe. And in that knowledge, a new courage grew inside her. She had always been the one in need of protection, but now she felt a desperate urge to be more than a passive observer, to understand, to stand with him, and to face whatever threats the world dared to bring. The bond between them had shifted subtly, imperceptibly, yet irrevocably. What began as protection had evolved into something more profound, A connection built on trust, mutual respect, and the quiet acknowledgement of shared vulnerability. She was no longer the helpless girl who had been shunned by everyone, she was someone who mattered deeply to a man who would move mountains to keep her safe. And as the city stretched out endlessly below, sparkling with life and danger alike, Lily knew that the challenges ahead would test them both, but she also knew, for the first time, that she wasn't alone. The days of quiet peace were suddenly shattered when the first real threat arrived. Lily had been sitting by the window, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars, when the subtle tension in the penthouse shifted, an almost imperceptible vibration that made her heart race. She didn't need to be told, instinctively, she knew danger had come too close. He had been tense all day, his jaw clenched, eyes constantly scanning even the smallest movements outside the windows. Lily had come to know the signs of his alertness, the silent signals that the world beyond their sanctuary had intruded. It began with a knock, sharp, deliberate, and unnervingly confident. He rose immediately, moving to intercept the visitor, while Lily rolled her wheelchair back just far enough to be out of harm's way but close enough to hear. From her vantage point, she caught fragments of his conversation, low voices, threats veiled in civility, and the dangerous undercurrent of someone testing his patience. Every word he spoke carried weight, authority, and an unshakable command, but she could see the subtle strain in his posture, the careful control in his movements. Even the most skilled adversaries could not have guessed how close danger had come, but she felt it deep in her chest. When he returned, the calm demeanor she had come to rely on was tinged with urgency. "They're probing for weakness," he said, his eyes dark and serious, meeting hers. "It won't be long before they make a move." The words made her stomach twist with fear, but she refused to let it show. She had spent a lifetime being fragile in the eyes of the world, but with him, she was learning to face danger with courage. Still, the reality of his life, and the risks she now shared, made her pulse quicken in ways she had never imagined. Over the next several hours, he moved with precision, planning, instructing his trusted allies, and securing the penthouse with an intensity that left Lily both in awe and quietly terrified. He never explained the full details, and yet, the subtle reassurances, the hand resting on her shoulder, the occasional brush of his fingers against hers, spoke volumes. She realized that his declaration of, "She's mine," was more than possessiveness, it was a vow of protection, a promise to shield her from the world even if it meant putting himself at risk. For the first time, Lily fully understood the depths of his devotion. That night, as the city hummed below, the danger became tangible. A rival from his past had sent a warning, a message meant to intimidate, to remind him that nothing was beyond reach. He read it in silence, his face unreadable, but Lily could see the tension in his hands, the tight line of his lips. He did not speak of it immediately, choosing instead to focus on her. "Don't let fear take hold," he said softly, guiding her to a more secure part of the penthouse. "You are safe here, no matter what they think." His words were a balm, yet the undercurrent of threat was unmistakable. She realized that in his world, safety was never guaranteed, and yet he was willing to create it for her, tirelessly and without complaint. The following days were a delicate balance between calm and alertness. He trained her subtly, teaching her ways to respond, to recognize danger, and to trust her instincts. Every lesson carried a hidden purpose, preparing her for a world that could be cruel, violent, and unpredictable. And yet, amidst the tension, there were moments of quiet intimacy, a shared laugh over a book, a gentle touch as he adjusted her blanket, or a look that lingered just a heartbeat too long. It was in these moments that Lily realized their bond had evolved beyond protection. It was trust, affection, and an unspoken promise of devotion that neither dared name aloud yet both understood completely. One evening, the threat escalated. He received word that someone had been seen near the penthouse, watching, waiting for an opportunity. Lily's heart pounded as he moved with deliberate calm, securing doors, checking cameras, and instructing his allies with precision. He never let panic show, but she could sense the intensity of his concern. "Stay here," he said firmly, his hand brushing hers briefly in a gesture meant to reassure. "I won't let anything happen to you." There was no hesitation in his voice, only the unwavering certainty that she mattered more than any risk he faced. As the night deepened, the rival made a bold move, attempting to breach the perimeter. The security system alerted him instantly, and he sprang into action with a speed and decisiveness that left Lily breathless. Though she was not in physical danger, the tension was palpable. She felt every heartbeat, every calculated move he made to ensure her safety. It was the first time she truly understood the stakes of his world, not just the power and wealth, but the constant, relentless threats that came with it. And yet, she also realized the depth of his commitment. No one would harm her under his watch, not if he could prevent it. After the immediate danger passed, he returned to her side, carrying her gently into the main living area. "You don't need to be afraid," he said, his voice calm, yet there was a fierceness in his eyes she had come to recognize as protection incarnate. Lily felt a mixture of awe and gratitude. He had risked everything for her, yet there was no trace of boasting or arrogance, only quiet, unwavering care. She realized then that her life had changed irreversibly. She was no longer the abandoned girl from the orphanage, she was someone who mattered deeply to a man whose influence spanned the city, whose devotion to her was absolute. In the days that followed, their bond strengthened further. He encouraged her to explore the penthouse, to interact with his trusted allies, and even to voice her opinions on decisions, subtle as they were. For someone who had spent years feeling powerless, the experience was exhilarating. And yet, the danger remained, a constant shadow that both tested and reinforced their connection. Lily found herself learning to navigate fear and trust simultaneously, guided by the man who had claimed her as his own. One quiet night, as they sat together on the terrace, the city sprawling below like a glittering ocean, he reached for her hand. "I've faced countless threats in my life," he said softly, "but none of them compare to the fear of losing you." Lily's chest tightened. She had spent years believing she was invisible, unworthy, and easily forgotten, yet here was a man who feared for her as if she were the most precious thing in existence. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. That night, as she lay in the safety of her room, Lily understood the profound truth of their relationship. He had claimed her not for possession alone, but because he saw her worth in a world that had failed to notice it. He had brought her into a life filled with danger, power, and unpredictability, and yet, he had created a sanctuary where she could feel safe, cherished, and respected. And for the first time in her life, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future, one where she was no longer defined by weakness or rejection, but by courage, trust, and the unwavering devotion of the man who had claimed her as his own. The city outside continued to pulse with life, indifferent as ever, but inside the penthouse, a new story was unfolding, a story of trust, danger, and the fragile beginnings of love that neither Lily nor the Mafia boss could have anticipated. And as the night deepened, Lily realized that the challenges ahead would test them both, but for the first time, she knew that they were stronger together than apart, and that nothing, not fear, not danger, not the world itself, could sever the bond that had begun to grow between them. The tension that had been simmering finally erupted into a confrontation that neither Lily nor the Mafia boss could ignore. It was a cold evening, the kind where the city streets glistened under wet asphalt, reflecting the neon lights like fractured jewels. Lily sat by the window, her fingers drumming lightly on the windowsill, sensing the unease that had settled over the penthouse. He had been unusually quiet all day, his sharp eyes constantly scanning every movement outside, and the occasional low rumble of his voice when speaking to his allies hinted at the storm brewing just beyond their walls. When the doorbell rang, a sound that usually signified the arrival of a delivery or a visitor, Lily's heart leapt into her throat. She knew this was no ordinary knock. He moved instantly, his presence commanding, and she felt the familiar mix of fear and awe as he intercepted the visitor. The air was thick with tension as he spoke in low, measured tones, each word deliberate, carrying the weight of authority and the unspoken threat of what he could do if provoked. She could hear the subtle exchange of words, the sharp edge of a rival testing boundaries, trying to gauge the man who had claimed her as his own. After the visitor left, he returned to her side, his face set in a mask of calm, though Lily could sense the storm beneath it. "They're bold tonight," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "And that boldness comes with consequences." She looked into his eyes and saw not just protection, but an intensity that made her pulse quicken. It was frightening and thrilling all at once. She realized that in his world, loyalty and danger were inseparable, and being close to him meant being caught in the crossfire. Despite the danger, he never let her feel powerless. Instead, he involved her in small ways, teaching her to be aware of the subtle signals of threats, showing her the ropes of vigilance without making her fear her own abilities. He would place her near the window, pointing out movements below, teaching her to anticipate, to observe, to trust her instincts. At first, it was overwhelming, the idea that she could contribute in a world so different from the quiet, limited life she had known. But slowly, she began to absorb his lessons, the confidence that came not from physical ability but from awareness and sharp thinking. The night deepened, and with it, a real test arrived. A minor breach at the penthouse's outer perimeter triggered alarms, and he sprang into action, a whirlwind of calculated movements and precise commands. Lily watched, tense but entranced, as he orchestrated the defense. She saw the subtle glances exchanged with his allies, the silent instructions, and the unspoken assurance that she would not be harmed. Her heart pounded as she realized how much he valued her safety, how much he would risk without hesitation. She had been shunned her whole life, overlooked, treated as fragile, yet here was a man willing to put everything on the line for her. When the danger subsided, he returned, his presence a solid anchor in the chaos that lingered in her chest. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice soft but serious. Lily nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. He took her hand in his, a gesture so simple yet so grounding that it made her feel secure in ways words could not describe. For the first time, she allowed herself to lean into someone completely, to trust that the protection was real, unwavering, and absolute. That night, they shared a quiet moment in the study, sitting side by side, her wheelchair positioned close to his chair. He didn't speak of the threats, the rivalries, or the violence. Instead, he focused on her, on their bond, on the fragile trust that had begun to grow. He recounted stories from his past, moments of vulnerability rarely revealed to anyone, and she listened, fascinated by the depth behind the man who seemed invincible to the outside world. And in return, she shared pieces of her past, her fears, her loneliness, and the way the world had always treated her as less than. He listened without judgment, absorbing every word, every pause, every trembling admission, and it became clear that their connection was evolving into something far deeper than either had anticipated. Days passed in this rhythm of quiet tension and growing intimacy. He continued to teach her, protect her, and include her in his world in ways that made her feel powerful despite her physical limitations. She began to understand the nuances of his life, the alliances, the rivalries, the unspoken rules of his empire, and with each revelation, her respect and admiration for him deepened. And he, in turn, saw in her a resilience he had rarely encountered, a strength that went beyond physical ability, rooted in courage, empathy, and intelligence. One evening, after a long day of subtle vigilance, they found themselves alone on the terrace, the city sprawling endlessly below. The night was calm, the tension of the day replaced by a quiet intimacy. He reached for her hand, holding it gently but firmly, and looked into her eyes with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "You've grown stronger these past days," he said softly. "Not in ways most people can see, but in ways that matter. And I am proud of you." Lily felt a lump form in her throat, her emotions swirling in a mix of gratitude, awe, and something she hadn't yet named. She realized that she was no longer the abandoned girl who had once been invisible to the world. She was someone who mattered deeply to a man whose devotion was absolute. That night, as they sat in the quiet safety of the penthouse, Lily felt a shift within herself. The fear that had once defined her existence began to ebb, replaced by courage, trust, and a new awareness of her own value. And in the gentle gestures, the brush of a hand, the warmth of his presence, the way he claimed her not just as someone to protect, but as someone to cherish, she recognized the beginnings of a connection that would shape both of their lives in ways neither could yet comprehend. As sleep claimed her, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the orphanage, shunned and overlooked, to this penthouse, caught in a world of power, danger, and unwavering devotion. She realized that life would never be simple, that threats would always linger at the edges, and that the man who had claimed her would face dangers she might never fully understand. But she also knew that she would no longer face life alone. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she was valued, protected, and loved, and she felt a courage bloom within her, a quiet but unshakable resolve to face whatever the world might throw at them, together. And as the city slept beneath them, oblivious to the drama unfolding above, Lily understood the profound truth of her new life. She was no longer defined by weakness or rejection. She was defined by courage, trust, and the bond she shared with a man who had declared her his own, and for the first time in her life, she knew she was truly safe, truly cherished, and truly alive. The city was alive with the hum of activity, but in the penthouse, a tense silence hung thick in the air. Lily sat by the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the tension she had felt all week settling into a palpable knot in her chest. The threats from his enemies had grown bolder, and she could see it in the way he moved, every glance sharp, every word measured, every step deliberate. Yet despite the looming danger, he remained calm in front of her, a fortress of strength that both reassured and awed her. She had grown to trust him completely, yet tonight, there was a palpable undercurrent of urgency she could not ignore. He returned from a brief call with a silent look in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. "They're coming," he said simply, his voice steady but carrying a weight that made her stomach twist. Lily's heart raced, but she refused to panic. She had learned from him over the past days, how to stay aware, how to anticipate, and how to rely on the courage she hadn't known she possessed. And yet, this was different. This was real danger, the kind that could not be mitigated by preparation alone. He moved swiftly, instructing his allies with precision while never leaving her side. "Stay close to me," he said, his hand resting lightly on hers. "No matter what happens, you follow my lead." His presence was a shield, both literal and emotional, and Lily felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. She had faced so many moments of helplessness in her life, yet here, in his protection, she felt the power of trust in its purest form. She knew that whatever happened, he would not let her be harmed. The confrontation came suddenly. A group of men forced their way into the penthouse's lower level, attempting to reach them. He sprang into action, moving with a lethal combination of speed and calculated force, each movement precise, each decision critical. Lily watched, tense but focused, as he neutralized threats with a skill that was almost otherworldly. He was fearless, determined, and unwavering, a man who would face any danger for the person he had claimed as his own. And in that moment, Lily realized the depth of his devotion was limitless. He had put everything on the line for her without hesitation. Amid the chaos, he found her hand again, guiding her away from immediate danger, his grip firm and grounding. "You're safe," he said, his voice low but resolute. "I won't let them touch you." She felt the warmth of his protection envelop her, and in that instant, all the fear she had carried for years began to dissolve. The world that had once rejected her, that had treated her as fragile and unworthy, had been replaced by a man who valued her above all else. She was no longer powerless, she was someone worth protecting, someone worth fighting for, and someone deeply cherished. As the last of the intruders were subdued, he turned to her, his dark eyes softening for the first time that night. "Are you all right?" he asked, brushing a stray hair from her face. Lily nodded, though her hands trembled slightly from adrenaline. He lifted her gently, carrying her to the safety of the inner living area, and for the first time, she allowed herself to truly relax in his presence. The danger was over, at least for now, and the knowledge that he had risked everything to keep her safe left her overwhelmed with emotion. The following hours were quiet but charged with unspoken feelings. He stayed close to her, ensuring she felt secure, while she absorbed the reality of the night's events. She had been terrified, but she had also witnessed his unwavering courage, his strategic brilliance, and, most importantly, the depth of his commitment to her. It was a commitment that went beyond protection, it was devotion, loyalty, and a love that was impossible to ignore. That night, as they sat together on the terrace overlooking the city, he reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers with a tenderness that belied the intensity of the day. "I told you once that you were mine," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper against the backdrop of the bustling city below. "And tonight, after everything, I'll say it again. You're mine, not because you need protection, but because I choose you. Always." Lily felt her chest tighten, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. She had spent years being overlooked, abandoned, and dismissed, yet here was a man whose every word and action affirmed her worth. In the days that followed, their lives settled into a new rhythm. The danger that had once loomed so heavily became a shadow in the background, always present but never overwhelming. He continued to guide her, teach her, and protect her, but there was also laughter, quiet moments of intimacy, and the gradual blossoming of a romance that neither had anticipated. Lily discovered that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined, and he discovered that his heart, long guarded and feared by many, had found a home in her. One evening, as they watched the sun set over the city skyline, he turned to her, his expression serious yet tender. "You've changed me, Lily," he admitted quietly. "You've reminded me that life isn't just about power, control, or fear. It's about connection, trust, and the courage to let someone in. You've given me that, and I will never let it go." Lily felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of pride, love, and awe. She had found someone who saw her not as weak, but as resilient, not as fragile, but as extraordinary. The final moments of the story were quiet, intimate, and deeply emotional. They sat together on the terrace, hand in hand, watching the city that had once seemed so indifferent and cold. She no longer felt invisible or powerless, she felt alive, cherished, and profoundly loved. He leaned close, brushing a gentle kiss across her forehead, and she felt a sense of completeness she had never known. For years, she had believed that the world had no place for her, but here, in his arms, she realized that she had found not just safety, but a home. As night fell, Lily rested against him, the chaos of the outside world fading into the background. She had faced fear, danger, and uncertainty, yet she had emerged stronger, braver, and more certain of her own worth than ever before. And he, the man who had claimed her, had revealed not just his strength and power, but a depth of love and devotion that few could comprehend. Together, they had navigated the dangers of his world, and together, they had discovered a connection that transcended fear, uncertainty, and even fate itself. In the end, the story was not about power or danger alone, it was about trust, devotion, and the transformative power of being seen and cherished for who one truly was. Lily, the girl who had been shunned and overlooked, had found a man willing to risk everything for her. And he, the feared and powerful Mafia boss, had found someone who softened the edges of his world, someone worth every battle, every risk, and every act of courage. As the city slept beneath them, the penthouse remained a sanctuary of safety, love, and trust. Lily had been claimed, not just for protection, but for the heart that had learned to trust, love, and believe in someone again. And he, who had once walked through the world with caution and authority, had found in her a reason to embrace vulnerability, connection, and the most profound devotion he had ever known. Together, they were no longer defined by fear, weakness, or solitude, they were defined by courage, love, and the unbreakable bond that had grown between them, stronger than any danger the world could send their way.